In this episode, we are back into the Ramayana. Hanuman has just returned from Lanka, leaving it a mess. We'll see Lankans picking up the pieces, while Ram, Lakshman, and the Vanars plan to rescue Sita. Welcome to Stories from India. This is a podcast that will take you on a journey through the rich mythology, folklore, and history of the Indian subcontinent. I am Narad Muni, the celestial storyteller and the original Time Lord. With my ability to travel through space and time, I can bring you exciting and fascinating stories from the past, the present, and the future. From the epic tales of the Mahabharata and Ramayana to the folk tales of the Panchatantra, to stories of Akbar Birbal and Tenali Raman, I have a story for every occasion. The purpose of the stories is neither to pass judgment nor to indoctrinate. My goal is only to share these stories with people who may not have heard them before, and to make them more entertaining for those who have. Usually, I recap the story for you in my own words. But this time, I'm going to do things differently. Conveniently, I went back in time and got a Lankan newspaper. I think this one gives a good summary. The article contains a bit more than what we need. But out of respect for the journalist who took all the pains to write it, I will read it in its entirety. The article was in the Lankan Herald, and it was titled Lanka in Flames. Hanuman's rampage highlights government's failure. It went like this. The city is still in shock after yesterday's events, which saw the Vanar, Hanuman, burn down large portions of the city. Some sources have claimed this to be an inevitable consequence of the government's policy of meddling in foreign affairs. Others are pointing fingers at the Lankan administration, blaming the government for the destruction. It may be worth recapping the story, as the saga of the Princess of Ayodhya has taken many dramatic turns over the last several weeks. Readers may recall that Prince Ram, Prince Lakshman, and Princess Sita were banished from their hometown as a result of a domestic squabble. It was initially reported by this news outlet that Sita was rescued from the horrors of the Dandak forest. The poor princess had to suffer those horrors for 13 years before the timely intervention of our government in rescuing her. Recent events have cast those actions in a completely different light. New evidence has emerged that the event was an abduction, not a rescue. Further, sources say that the abduction of Sita was in retaliation for crimes against our princess Shurpanakha. A senior government official, speaking on condition of anonymity, claimed that it was wrong for foreigners to be abducted and to become a ward of the state. Why must hard-working Lankans pay for the upkeep of foreigners? This government official strongly advocated for only abducting local women. Another high-ranking official, also speaking on condition of anonymity, claimed that it was the government's lack of preparedness and failure to adequately defend the city from outside threats which allowed Hanuman to wreak havoc unchecked. It is not only people within the government who view its latest actions with a critical eye. Residents are also frustrated with the government's slow response to the biggest crisis in our history and the inadequate measures taken to evacuate citizens and to provide relief. Adding insult to injury, several high ranking officials were seen fleeing the city during the attack, leaving the citizens to fend for themselves. This has led to widespread anger and calls for those officials to be held accountable for their actions. This latest catastrophe only underscores the larger issue of the Lankan government's inability to maintain security and protect its citizens. No replacement has been found for the post of guardian of the gates. Readers will doubtless recall how Lankini was released from her curse when she was defeated by Hanuman during his illegal entry into our city. The residents of Lanka deserve better, and it is time for the administration to step up and take responsibility for their mistakes. An official spokesperson for the government expressed thoughts and prayers for those impacted by the fires and urged Lankans to remain calm and patient as the city begins the long road to recovery. The spokesperson also claimed that Hanuman's mission of taking back Sita was foiled by the quick actions of our fearless leader himself. Some have already cast doubt on this claim, and they are warning us of an impending invasion. The government spokesperson dismissed these claims because Ram and Lakshman have no army to invade with, and the kingdom of Ayodhya will not act on behalf of banished citizens. There may be many unanswered questions about the future of our city, but even as citizens are left to pick up the pieces, one thing is clear. It is crucial that lessons are learned from this tragedy. The citizens of Lanka deserve a government that is proactive in protecting them and ensuring their safety. Until that happens, it seems that the city will remain vulnerable to outside threats and the wrath of foreigners like Hanuman. So that's the article. I hope it gives you a gist of the story so far. What the article is careful not to mention is that the abduction of Sita was carried out by Ravan, the king of Lanka. Ravan, the 10-headed demon king, had superpowers that he had received from Brahma himself. And Ravan was the supervillain in this saga. Ram, on the other hand, was an avatar of Vishnu, who appeared with the express purpose of putting an end to Ravan's tyranny. Following the events described in the article, Hanuman, the Super Vanar, flew back to Sugriv's base camp. Sugriv was the king of the Vanars who was helping Ram and Lakshman in their search for Sita. And it's at this point that we'll continue the story. Hanuman had taken the liberty of letting all the Vanars feast themselves on the best fruits in Sugriv's private garden. Sugriv did mind, but couldn't say anything about it just then. Everyone else was speculating what Hanuman must have discovered. This scene is set in Sugriv's war room, in the basement of his palace. Ram, Lakshman and Sugriv were there, of course, and so was Hanuman. A few other Vanas were there too. Angad, Nala, Nila and Jambavan, who was not a Vanar but a bear. There was also an old Vanar who was just called the Wise One. He was so old that he had forgotten his own name. So, the Wise One worked well as a substitute. There was also a Vanar with a typewriter to note down the meeting minutes. Let's call him Sachiv, which literally means secretary. The secretary went through the routine of announcing the members and announcing why they had gathered. It was a good thing he did, because Jambavan the bear had been hibernating just then, and he missed all the action with Hanuman's return. The secretary said that they were all there for a debrief, and as usual, they were first going to read the minutes from the last meeting. And those minutes, Sachiv said, started by reading the minutes from 2 meetings ago. This recursive reference was something Sugriv had insisted on for his own private amusement. But this was no time for monkey business. Sugriv could read the room and the impatient glances from everyone. Yes, let's skip that, he said aloud to the secretary. Hanuman, you have the floor. Hanuman told them his story. We'll skip that part, since you already heard it from the Lankan journalist. He ended it by saying that they must all immediately go to Lanka. There were nods all around the table, except from the wise one. When Hanuman was describing his encounter with Sita, Ram felt a jolt of excitement rush through him. Sita was alive. Now that Hanuman had located her precisely, all they had to do was to go there and get her. But 2 problems remained. Ram focused on the smaller problem first. Hanuman, you've told us all about your meeting with Sita. By any chance, did you also observe anything about Lanka's military capabilities? Hanuman said that he had, and not just observed, but he had swooped into Lanka's city planning department and grabbed a whole bunch of blueprints and schematics. There was a lot to read there, so Hanuman said that he would just give them a summary. The entire city was walled. It was impossible for humans or even Vanars to scale those walls without specialized climbing equipment and ropes and such, the type that hadn't been invented yet. What about ladders? Nala interrupted. I had this weird dream about some evil creatures called orcs that use these gigantic ladders to get into this place called Helm's Deep. Tell us about your dream another time, Nala. Maybe write a book about it. I'm sure a lot of people will be interested in reading it. But for now, if you don't mind, I'll carry on with my description. Besides, the walls are not our problem. Hanuman went on to explain that the entire city was surrounded by a massive moat with crocodiles in it. There were 4 bridges across the moat, at each of the 4 doors. Each door was made of several layers of logs, practically impenetrable. The wood was also covered in a special fire deterrent, so they couldn't just set it on fire and burn down the door that way. Those were just the examples of the rigid physical obstructions. The real challenge was going to be the people they had to fight. The Lankan warriors had weapons, all kinds of powerful weapons, and they had magic on their side. They could fly. They were expert illusionists. The biggest threat was going to be them. There was Indrajit. He was called that because he had literally defeated Indra, the king of the Devs himself. There was Kumbhakarna, a giant even amongst the giant demons of Lanka. And then there was Ravan himself, the 10-headed demon king. He could not be defeated by anyone. In fact, the only one who had succeeded so far was Vali. Yes, the very same Vali whose help they could no longer rely on, because they had assassinated him in episode 125. The ordinary Lankan soldiers may not have all the superpowers of their commanders, but they had a huge advantage in battle. Literally huge, because they had thousands of well-trained elephants. Those elephants could crush enemy soldiers at a signal. The wise one hadn't said a word so far, but now he did. Yes, yes, well done. Well done, Hanuman. All that information is a huge win for us. But is it really? Now, all of Lanka knows that we are on our way. We've lost the element of surprise. Yes, we have located Sita, but we only know where Sita was today. What if Ravan decides to move her? He's got a flying car, a Pushpak Viman, and he can fly himself, even without the Viman. What's stopping Ravan from simply moving Sita elsewhere? What will happen if we cross the ocean, cross the crocodile-infested moat, scale those massive walls, fight those thousands of elephants and hundreds of thousands of demons, and then we find that Sita's been moved? We're all going to look pretty silly then. But the wise one also had a reputation for being grumpy. So no one paid much attention to the possibility that Ravan might, in fact, move Sita out of Lanka. Meanwhile, in the walled city, surrounded by its crocodile-infested moat, Lankans went about rebuilding their city with their trained elephants. But a different sort of activity was taking place in the palace. The scene is set in Ravan's war room, in the basement of the palace. Ravan, his son Indrajit, his brother Vibhishan were all there, of course. There was also Ahiravan, Ravan's brother, who ruled the netherworld. And there was Kumbhakarna, the giant of a brother who could make someone like Hagrid look like a midget by comparison. If you know your Harry Potter. Kumbhakarna had just woken up from a long nap. A few other demons were there too. But there was no one with a typewriter, unlike the Warner Council. Because some things are too embarrassing to be on record. He came, he saw, he conquered, said Vibhishan. Conquered nothing, objected Indrajit. He failed. That monkey couldn't take Sita away, and not one of us was hurt. I don't know if he was on a rescue mission or an assassination mission, but either way, it didn't work. Prahasta, a demon who was a commander in the army, chimed in that he agreed with Indrajit. Hanuman only got the residences and shops in the city. He didn't even attack their military base. There was nothing to worry about. On the contrary, Vibhishan retorted, we have everything to worry about. Look at the damage a single monkey has done to us. Now imagine what might happen if Ram and Lakshman themselves arrived here with 1,000 monkeys. And how exactly would they arrive? Objected Indrajit. In case you haven't noticed, There's a massive ocean in between us, and unlike us, they have neither a Pushpak Viman nor can they fly. Excellent point, my dear nephew, Vibhishan said. Something that I'd been meaning to bring up myself. They have neither a flying car nor can they fly like we can. And yet, Hanuman showed up here. There were murmurs around the table. Maybe he used a boat, someone ventured. With all those sea monsters on the way? I don't think so. Indrajit tried a different tactic. How does it matter how Hanuman got here? Even if he did somehow manage to hitch a ride from a passing flock of geese, the point is they can't get here en masse. And that's where you, Indrajit, and really all of you, are underestimating Ram. He has weapons that can dry up the entire ocean. But I don't think he will, Kumbhakarna observed. He'd only be putting the entire planet in danger. Ravan felt the need to intervene. So what are you proposing, Vibhishan? Assuming you are proposing something. I have to say, your pessimism isn't helping here. Send Sita back, Vibhishan said. Send her with gifts for Ram and Lakshman, and even the Vanars. Give them gold. Make peace, not war. And maybe, just maybe, our city will survive. Indrajit stood up from his seat in anger and called his uncle several things that are not polite ways to address your uncle. And it was clear that he spoke for the rest of the table. We'll have no more of that, little brother, Ravan said to Vibhishan. Let's instead see how we can properly manage this threat. At this point, Kumbhakarna spoke up. Look, I know I missed all the action while I was sleeping these past few months, but I have to say one thing. It is indeed a sin that you have committed, Ravan. It was not okay for you to have carried off another man's wife. That's just not cricket. That being said, I will stand by you. I'm going to crush Ram and Lakshman into tiny pieces. That will legitimize your future marriage to Sita. And then we are free to write the history books any way we want. I've got it, Prahast said. Why not marry Sita now? Just do it. That will devastate Ram. Maybe even discourage him from coming here. Ravan paused for a couple of seconds, and then sheepishly admitted that he couldn't. And it wasn't just because the Kalyan Mandap had been burned down by Hanuman. Ravan genuinely couldn't forcibly marry Sita. There was a curse on him, a curse from Brahma. There was a collective gasp from the table. Not so much because Ravan had a curse on him. Rather, they were shocked that Brahma was capable of cursing anyone. Usually, he just handed out superpowers. Another demon, Mahaparshva, had been largely silent so far. He volunteered to end this, here and now. Well, not here and now, but today, in Sugriev's camp. He could just fly across the ocean that night, with a small crew, say 4 other Rakshas. They could assume the form of Ayodhya soldiers and claim to be from Bharat's army, sent there to help Ram. And when they got close enough, one of them would take out his sword, and it would be off with Ram's head. It would be a piece of cake. Don't get him wrong, he didn't mean that literally. Both pieces of cake and human heads were staple demon food, but cakes are sweet. Or even if Mahaparshiva didn't want to take a chance of being too close, the demon and his 4 henchmen could throw rocks from up in the sky. Gravity could do most of the work. They just had to aim well. Ravan was tempted. That might solve his problem. But Indrajit and Kumbhakarna and the other demons were quite opposed to it. Indrajit felt he needed to demonstrate the power of his awesomeness against those monkeys. So he was thirsty for battle. Sneaking up behind their backs, or rather sneaking up on them from above and destroying them with well-chosen rocks, would be a bit anticlimactic. Kumbhakarna felt the same. He personally wanted to crush the Ayodhya brothers. Sneaking up on them in the middle of the night was no sneakier than Ravan's act of carrying Sita off while Ram and Lakshman weren't around. Mahaparshiva didn't look convinced, but he didn't say anything. Ravan got a little worried. That demon had been known to take matters into his own hands before. He must keep one of his 20 eyes on Mahaparshiva to make sure that he didn't attempt to carry out the stone-throwing plan. Ravan didn't have any concerns with it if the demon succeeded. But if he failed, that would be worse than if he hadn't tried at all. There were more discussions and debates, until finally they all agreed, somewhat reluctantly, to a compromise solution. They would send a messenger to speak to the enemy. It was a true compromise because none of the members wanted exactly that. It's just that this became the least hateful alternative. The messenger would be aimed not at Ram, but at Sugriv. Ravan provided a carefully worded message that everyone agreed would aim to break the partnership between the Ayodhya brothers and the Vanars. No one even brought up the possibility of moving Sita to some other secure location. Thankfully so. Otherwise, it would have seriously complicated the rescue mission. The meeting concluded, everyone went their way. Except there was a Rakshas amongst the crew who did something that he was not supposed to. He gathered 4 of his most trustworthy men for a mission. They prepared to fly and took all of their best weapons with them. Silently and avoiding the watchful eyes of everyone else in Lanka, they took off from the rooftops and sailed in the wind, headed directly for Sugriv's headquarters. They had also decided to act from the sky. It didn't make sense for them to be on the ground amongst the Vanars. The crowd might become hostile and rough them up. As they reached the palace, it was still late evening. They'd encountered a good tailwind and practically no turbulence. These demons expected to find everyone sleeping, but they were wrong. The council meeting at Sugriv's palace was still going on, but they had changed the venue after the lunch break. They decided that there was no need for them to be sneaky and to do this war room discussion in the basement of the palace. They could have this discussion in the palace garden, out in the open. Not Sugriv's private garden that the Vanars had raided earlier in the day. This was a different garden. They were discussing the bigger problem that Ram had thought of. How could they all cross over to Lanka? They had many ideas. Nala suggested giant inflatable helium balloons. He had an idea that with enough balloons, you could lift even something as heavy as a house right up off the ground. Angad said they could grab some massive sea creatures and use them as transport. The Jedi did this regularly a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Why couldn't they just grab a passing blue whale or something and teach it to carry Vanars on its back? But both of these ideas were dismissed as being too impractical. Sugriv said that Hanuman could grow any size he wanted. Couldn't he just ferry us all on his back or something? Too dangerous, Hanuman said. To do that, I'd have to grow so large that I might risk causing an apocalypse. I might strip the earth of its entire atmosphere the next time I inhale. Or if I were to move or jump or anything at all, it might kick the earth out of its orbit and freeze the entire planet. Nila said that they should build several giant mirrors. They could focus them all on the ocean, and given enough time, the water would all evaporate. Of course, there was a risk that all the evaporating water would promptly come back to the ocean as part of the water cycle. The secretary volunteered here. What about the magical green stone that could make the ocean itself clear a path that could be walked across? He had heard of something like that, helping a Pacific Islander princess who went sailing across the ocean. Sugriv shook his head. His secretary was mixing mythologies here. No such stone existed in Indian mythology. Jambavan had an idea. Why not use a small or medium vessel propelled in water by oars, sails, or an engine? But no one seemed to believe that a vessel like that could hold thousands of Vanars and bears and humans. Because this happened before Archimedes, they didn't know much about buoyancy. They were still brainstorming when a voice spoke up from the sky. They were demons, 4 of them. Immediately, everyone became alert and drew out their weapons. The demon in the lead said, I am Ravan's brother, Vibhishan. I tried convincing my brother to give up Sita, but he wouldn't listen to me. I've given up my family and my kingdom, and I've come to join forces with you. Sugriv spoke in an aside to Ram that he wasn't fooled. Vibhishan was clearly a spy, and he was here to destroy them from the inside. Just give me the word, Ram, and we'll bring that demon down from the sky and rip him apart. But Ram asked him to wait. One by one, Ram quizzed each of the council members. Most of them thought that Vibhishan was a spy. Angad said that he wasn't sure, but they needed to test Vibhishan before Angad would agree to let him into their circle. The only one who thought differently was Hanuman. Hanuman applied what he called the psychology of the individual. Yeah, I'm ready to trust Vibhishan. He isn't here to spy on us. He's here for a purely selfish motive. Vibhishan wants to be on the winning side. He wants to become ruler of Lanka after we win the battle. And you can see from his manner that he's indeed convinced that the Lankans are going to lose this war. Of all the opinions that he heard, Ram agreed with Hanuman's. An additional point in its favor was that Ram didn't think Vibhishan could actually do anything to hurt them, even if he tried. Vibhishan came down to the ground with his mates when he heard Ram give his word that he was open to a partnership. Ravan's brother said that as a mark of their partnership, he had a lot of beans that he was ready to spill. And he didn't mean that literally. He meant he had secrets. He had tried to bring along some schematics from the city planning department, but apparently they'd been stolen earlier. Funny coincidence. But anyway, Vibhishan described Lanka's defenses with the same level of detail as Hanuman had, which also helped to prove that at least Vibhishan wasn't misleading them. But the bigger problem remained. How were they going to get across the ocean? And Vibhishan didn't have an answer for that either. The council decided that the next step was to move towards the shore. Nothing they were going to do here was going to work. They had two ideas at the top of their shortlist. The first was to pray to the sea god to open up a pathway across the ocean, just like the secretary had imagined that other mythologies would remember in the future. The other idea was to dry up the ocean, but not using Nila's idea of giant mirrors. Ram had an arrow that could dry up the ocean a lot faster. Sure, it would risk an apocalypse, but at least it would be something to fall back on if the ocean didn't clear a pathway for them. That's where we'll leave it this week. We'll see how the Vanars react to Ravan's messenger, and we'll see how they eventually manage to get across the ocean. But that is in a future episode. Check out the links in the show notes or on the site sfipodcast.com for links to previous Ramayana episodes. Next time, we'll learn a bit of wisdom from animal behavior. It's time to dive back into the Jatak tales. Thank you all for the comments on social media and on Spotify's Q&A. I can't directly reply to the questions there, but I'll address them here on this show. Thank you for the warm reception of the last episode. Well, you know how I know everything about the future. I can definitely say that a showbiz career is on the cards for Hira. But I can't tell you exactly when. You'll just have to wait for it yourself. I loved reading all of your comments. And Bindu, I will work on the Brahmaputra episode. Watch out for that in an upcoming episode. If you have any other comments or suggestions, or if there are particular stories that you'd like to hear, please do let me know by leaving a comment or a review on the site sfipodcast.com, or tweet at sfipodcast, or reply to the questions on Spotify's Q&A. You can also find me on Instagram and Facebook. Be sure to subscribe to the show to get notified automatically of new episodes. A big thank you to each and every one of you for your continued support and your feedback. The music is from purpleplanet.com. That's purple-planet.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next time.